After this upcoming football season, the new expansion in the playoff will be introduced. I'm one of the people who think that this is amazing for the sport and can only really see positives coming from it. I'm a big believer in parity, big believer in a lot of teams getting the chance. I just like more games. But some people think that this should not be the direction for college football. But I think the reasonings that they give are a bit flawed. So I'm gonna pretty much run down the reasons why I believe that college football works by debunking most of the reasons why it wouldn't. The first thing I want to talk about is this notion that expanding the college football playoff would devalue the regular season more, which is something I do not get, because if anything, it would make regular season games matter that much more to the casual fan for many different teams. Because back when it was a 4-team playoff, including this upcoming year, you're gonna quite see that when it gets towards the end of the year, there's only about maybe 2, maybe if you're lucky, 3 games that would matter. However, if you expand it to 12, then much more games towards the end of the year would matter. Much more upsets towards the end of the year will carry more weight. Like, say last year, if there was a 12-team playoff, LSU losing to Texas A&M would have meant a lot more than it did, because it not only stopped LSU's chances of making it to the top 4, it definitely would have kicked them out of the top 12, especially after losing to Georgia in the championship game. Imagine another unranked team this year beating the number 10 team in the final week of the season, causing the 10 to drop to 15. Like, the only real argument that is maybe a team might play someone 3 times, but an example that comes to my head when I think of that would be Ohio State versus Michigan. Since they always play at the end of the year, there'll be a chance they'll both be undefeated, play in that game, play in the championship, then play in the playoff. My argument is that's probably not gonna happen. It doesn't really happen often. College football is a lot more cyclical than people make it out to be. A lot of people tend to live in the moment. But even as a fan, why would you not want to watch that game just because it played multiple times? This is something that happens in baseball. This is something that happens in basketball with Duke and North Carolina. Literally a few years ago, Duke and North Carolina played in the Final Four. That means in basketball, they played 3 times. So just because Alabama played LSU in the season isn't going to change you watching them play in the championship game. And it's definitely not going to change y'all watching those same 2 teams play in the playoff. Every other sport does this except for college football, so I don't get that argument. The next argument is for the argument against the college football playoff as a whole, and this was an argument from when it started from the very beginning, is that it devalued conference championships, which I kind of agree with until they changed the new rules and expanded it. Because if anything now, this new college football playoff format would bring much more meaning to the conference championship. Because as of right now, the top 6 conference champions will be guaranteed a spot. And 4 of those 6 will get a first round bye, which is huge. So, and think about it, if you can get a first round bye in a playoff, in order to be considered, you have to win the conference championship. That will make the conference championships matter so much more. Just think about this for a second, what the playoff would have looked like last year if this was introduced. 1, TCU wouldn't have had a first round bye. They wouldn't have been the number 3 ranked team. They would have had to play in the first round, while teams like Clemson, teams like Utah was able to get a first round bye. Just think about how much different the playoff would have looked. You would have had Alabama to play Michigan in the second round. Granted, Alabama would have to win their first round matchup, but I could imagine a scenario where they would. Secondly, imagine a scenario where Ohio State didn't play in the championship game and they didn't win. They couldn't even be in position to be a field goal away from beating Georgia unless they first beat Penn State and then beat Clemson. So all because conference championships didn't matter, we would have never got a chance to see these great matchups. And now they're going to mean so much more to teams, which in my opinion will cause them to want to play their players more. People might say that, players that want to go to the league would sit out, but players will want to play for a championship. People will sit out of a bowl game, doesn't mean much. But now there's so many more teams with so many more draftable prospects playing against other draftable prospects, because now there's a common goal of trying to win the championship. And I just don't think that's a loss in any way. Now, one thing that increasing it from 4 to 12 teams will cause everyone to be up in arms about is the fact that for the past few years, there's really only been 2 teams each year that has a realistic shot of winning. I think that's perception. So when people think that more teams don't deserve in, I think that's an argument in bad faith, because literally when it was a 4-team playoff, the 5th ranked team, the 6th ranked team always had a case to get in. Even though you can look in hindsight and say, oh, they didn't deserve in, or they would have lost anyway, you got to be able to give the teams a chance. For the past almost decade, analysts and teams get mad about some aspect of the 4 teams chosen. And now, when you increase it to 12, it fixes all those issues, so I don't get why then people will go back and say that then teams that don't deserve in would not make it. Having every Power 5 conference champion, or in this case, after what happened to the Pac-12, Power 4, eliminates the committee picking against them. And it also eliminates the aspect of being actually not punished for not playing in the championship, like what happened in years past with Ohio State, with Alabama. There's also a huge misconception, like I stated earlier, that these teams have always been good and that they're always going to be dominant. Like, there was a time when Georgia was average in our lifetime. And there was also a time especially my lifetime, in my perspective, when Alabama lost to a group of 5 team under Nick Saban. No matter what is happening now, it won't be forever for any team because of NIL, transfer portal. All these things came into place to now even out the playing field for teams. No matter how dominant a team might look, over time, things even out. Especially now, at another point, no matter how dominant a team can be, we just saw this last year, good QB play can override how dominant a team can look on paper. The committee wouldn't have to be forced to always have to pick the 4 best teams for them based on different criteria each year, since the committee's different each year. Now you have 5 to 6 guaranteed slots. And then all you do is pick for the at-larges. That makes it so that every single team that has a case is pretty much going to make it in, including those lower level teams. So you don't have to have what happened with Cincinnati, where they go undefeated and there's people who actually have issues with them being in the playoff just because they wasn't a Power 5 team at the time. More teams will make the playoff without even participating in the conference championship back then, overriding teams who did. Now there's a chance that both of those teams will be able to make it in. Like, think of 2017 with Auburn. Auburn beats Georgia, beats Alabama, and then gets punished for losing to Georgia in the SEC championship game, while in that same year, Alabama was able to make the playoff just because they didn't play in the championship game. Granted, they ended up winning the whole thing, but this is what I'm saying when I said teams shouldn't be punished for playing the extra game and beating teams. For one more point on this, there's this concept of conference cannibalism that only seems to apply to the lower tier of the Power 5. See, if you're an SEC team or a Big Ten team, you're pretty much going to make the playoff if you win your conference. But now with this new playoff expansion, if you're in the Big 12 or the ACC and you beat up on each other and you mess around and get 2 losses because everyone is together, then you'll still be able to make the playoff and prove that your conference is the better conference. Everyone believes the SEC is the best, but like I said earlier, times are going to change eventually, and then there'll be a very big way to see the change in times with an expanded playoff. There's been several years, using Pac-12 as an example, where the Pac-12 would have a team primed to make the playoff, but then they'll lose in their conference and get knocked out. That happened every single year, I think, since Washington made it. So now stuff like that wouldn't happen, and every conference will be represented. Every conference will be able to show that they're the best conference for that year. Now, with the aforementioned Pac-12 conference, Unless you've been living under a rock, you would know that after this year, when the college football playoff is actually implemented, the Pac-12 is pretty much dead. Unless they make a merger, there's gonna probably be no Pac-12, and those teams will probably be independent. So Power 5 is pretty much turned into Power 4 by next year, since all these teams pretty much, 75% of the teams left to go to a different conference. I believe 4 to the Big 12 and 4 to the Big 10. Now, this will cause a little bit of issues, but this is a very simple fix. Instead of the top 6 ranked conference champions, just make it the top 5 and just add one more at-large team. Now, with the big conference like the Big 10 or the Big 12 and the SEC, that'll give them more opportunity to get more representation into the playoff. Now, since the Pac-12 will be no longer. But all in all, this playoff system is going to work. This playoff system is going to be great for fans, going to be great for revenue. This playoff system is going to get upsets. People are going to really be excited when this comes out and like the 7th seed ends up winning the Natty.